Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another video on Python fundamentals. We're going to continue learning about functions and methods, right? So our learning objectives for this video is to understand how Python functions are used. We're going to be speaking about positional arguments, keyword arguments, and recursion. Okay, so a function is a reusable block of code that is used to perform a single related action. Yes, we've discussed this. I've explained the whole process flow of once you have an input, you pass it into a function. There's a process, and then a process that manipulates your input to your desired output, right? And then you can present that result back to the user. So now, when we were speaking or explaining functions in the previous video, I spoke about parameters and arguments, and sometimes I use them interchangeably. So I just want to make the distinction quite clear right now. So you see a function called foobar, and it takes in two positional parameters, right? Well, let me say it has two positional parameters, x and y, all right? And it takes in two arguments that are going to be placed into this parameters, right? So it's essentially returning the sum of x and y. And then you see here, we invoke the function where we put in an argument of 12 into the position of x and 34. So this is a parameter. X and y are parameters. You can think of them as placeholders for the arguments that we will see, that we will use when we invoke the function. So these are just placeholders. And what happens essentially, these arguments, when I pass them into the function, they take the place of x and y based on their position. So these are, in this scenario, these are positional arguments, but we'll speak about that. So positional arguments, right, is a technique, or positional parameter passing, excuse me, where you assign the ith argument to the ith function parameter. And if we look on let's go back to this. So this is our first parameter, and this is our first argument over here, 12. The 12 is going to go into the place of x, and then we have our second parameter, y, and therefore 34 will go into that, to the place of y. All right, so we'll be returning the sum of 12 plus y. So if you look at this example function, we have three positional parameters, excuse me. And what we want to do is just print out these parameters, nothing too hectic. So essentially, so one will go into A, two will go into B, three will go into C, and then we should see something like 1, 2, 3 once we print. And then if you look at this one, we say, it's called intro, and it takes in the first name and the last name, and then it's a greeting, sawubona, igamalami, and then you put your first name and your last name, right? So if you're listening to this outside of South Africa, it's just saying, hello, my name is, and then your first name and your last name. Okay, so now let's go back to one of our functions that we created in the previous video for our calculating the cost of a trip and deciding whether we should go. You can see that we have three parameters, which is the cost of the trip, the budget, and the destination, right? And we give a little bit of an explanation of what this function does. And then you can see now, so whatever I put in here, I'm going to use there, right? So essentially, this is just saying if the cost of the trip is greater than our budget, then we are not going to go, right? So this is how you use a three parameter function. And in this scenario, these are all positional arguments. So something would, if you were to use this function incorrectly, let's say you passed in your budget, right, as the first, you passed in your budget as the first parameter and the cost of the trip as the second parameter, and you still left the destination the same. The function would still run. However, it would be semantically, it would syntactically still work, right? But it would not get the outcome that you have. So now you have your budget as your cost. So then if you're now saying, it'll now be like, if the budget is greater than the cost, then you see saying this is out of budget, but no, it's not out of budget since the budget is greater than the cost. So it'll not work correctly, but it will not work the way you intended it. But syntactically, Python won't tell you anything is wrong as long as these values are, that's a float, or it's a float and it's an integer, you know. But we'll talk about errors later on and how to do those checks quickly. So let's move on to keyword arguments. Now, so this technique is when you have an argument and it's dedicated by a given name and not a position, right? So if you look here on the left, right, we say intro, first name, last name, right? We have, these are both positional arguments. But now I can now give it a keyword argument. I can now say, actually, the first name is equals to Tabo, last name is equals to Creole. So now this is now, I've assigned a value to this keyword, you know? So then when I now call the function, it will know. And as you can see in this other one, in this other function, introduction, I should have called it intro, but let's continue. I now have last name coming first and first name coming last, right, or second. So in this scenario, it doesn't matter about the position. It will just carry in terms of the name of the argument, right, in the function. So you already specified a value. Okay. And then we have combining, like, so we can combine keyword arguments and positional arguments, right? So in this one, you can see that we just have positional here. We also just have positional. We have positional here, and we have keyword arguments here, where the order doesn't really matter. But now we have a summation where we're going to say 3. This is a positional argument, and then A, B, C. Now this would throw an error because what is happening is the function definition says A is the first parameter, right? And we've already put 1 there. So it's going to now say, okay, this is going to be 3. 8. Now you're not saying A is equal to 0.3. So what's happening here? So it will throw an error. So for this to work, right, this would have to be B, this would have to be C, but I'll show you in the examples later, right? So positional arguments come before keyword arguments. That's in bold. There's the golden rule. So you can't have a keyword, right, assignment that you now have a positional after it. That would also throw you an error, okay? And default parameters, where in the case where you just, in case the user does not send in any inputs to the function, it'll still run based on the default, right? And just like this introduction, we have first name, last name. So if they don't put a last name, it's always going to be whatever first name that they put /Smith, right? Hello, my name is Smith, is that. So the key takeaways: pass information. We pass information to functions using parameters, and those are arguments, right? Positional argument passing, where order of arguments passed into the function matters, right? So that is positional argument passing. The order matters in this scenario. Keyword order doesn't matter because we've assigned a keyword and the value to that keyword. So mixing, we can do mixing of positional and keyword arguments, but just remember that a positional argument cannot follow a keyword. And creating predefined values for keyword arguments, that's like your default values. All right, so let us jump into some Python code and we can continue. Okay, so we are back and let us continue. All right, so now we in the previous in the slides, we're talking about positional arguments and positional parameters. So I'll just speak about different type of functions, and I will start off with example a 1 parameter function. All right, we're gonna have 1 parameter function, and that's not how you call parameter, but let us fix that quickly. Parameter. Great. So remember, define, it turns blue because keyword introduction, right? And it's going to be the username as the 1 parameter. And I'm just going to say print, and let's keep it so Bona. And then we're going to say user, say user name, right? And then remember, let's invoke the function. We're going to invoke the function. All right. And it's going to be something along the line of introduction. And let's see what's going to be the username. The username should be a string. Bongi for the World Cup. And let me just check. So we just write Python. Well, we could actually run it from here. And yep, that's the output. So going to Bongi. And that's it working. Now let's see if we can, now let's move on to a 2 parameter function, right? 2 parameter function, just building this up until we're going to get into more complex functions. And it's going to take in a username. It's going to take in an email address. And then not an L, but print. And I think I could just take this rather than typing all of that out again. And print that again. And then we're going to say your email address is. And then what we'll go here would be your email address. Right, then invoke the function again. I'm just going to comment this one out. I'm going to say intro, and it takes in, there should be some, see, type, there's some hints there. It says username is any. So what's the username? Bongi with a capital B. And my email address is bongi@mail.za. And then if we run that, you should have Bongi, your email address is that, right?